I never wanted to be on TV. I never wanted to hear my name on the news. But when you're the son of Donald Trump, you don't get a choice. People talk about you like you're not even real, like you're just a name on a screen. Most of the time, I ignore it. I scroll past the comments, turn off the TV, pretend I don't hear the whispers when I walk into a room. But this time, I couldn't. I was in my bedroom, half listening to the news while scrolling through my phone. The anchor's voice was the same as always, fast, sharp, like every word needed to hit hard. I wasn't paying much attention until I heard my dad's name. That wasn't new. People talked about him all the time. But then I heard my name. Even his son, Barron, is probably being raised to believe the same nonsense. Mark Reynolds said, chuckling, like father, like son. Maybe one day he'll try to run for president too. Imagine that disaster. My stomach twisted. It wasn't the first time someone said something like that. But the way he laughed, like I was a joke, like I didn't matter, made my hands clench into fists. I turned to the screen, watching his smirk, the way the other reporters smiled like it was all just harmless fun. They didn't know me. They didn't care what I thought or felt. To them, I was just another easy target. I grabbed the remote and turned off the TV, but the words stayed in my head. I stared at the black screen, my reflection staring back at me. For a moment, I thought about letting it go. I thought about pushing it down like I always did. But this time, I wasn't sure I could. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing his voice, that smug laugh, like I was nothing, like I was just a shadow of my dad, doomed to be exactly like him whether I wanted to be or not. I wasn't angry at my father. I was angry at the way people acted like I didn't exist outside of his name. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Normally, I ignored stuff like this. That was what I was supposed to do, right? Be quiet. Stay out of the way. Let people say whatever they wanted. But something about this time felt different. Maybe because he had said my name. Maybe because I could already see the headlines. Maybe because deep down, I knew that if I let this go, it wouldn't stop. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the comments. Just like I expected, everyone had something to say. Some people defended me, but most didn't. He's just like his dad, entitled and clueless. Why does Barron act like he's above criticism? He's fair game. He'll never be anything but a Trump. It felt like they were deciding who I was before I even got a chance to figure out myself. I squeezed my phone, my jaw tightening. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to play their game. But I also didn't want to just sit here and let them paint me into a picture that wasn't me. I exhaled slowly and pulled up Mark Reynolds' social media. His latest post was a clip from the show, the one where he laughed at me. Thousands of people were liking it, commenting, sharing it like it was all just some big joke. I hovered over the comment box. For a second, I thought about saying something, but I knew that wouldn't change anything. If I just argued back, it would only turn into another headline. Then an idea hit me, something that made my fingers freeze above the screen. I clicked on the message button and typed 2 words. Let's talk. I stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't like me to do this. It wasn't like me to call someone out, especially not someone like him. He had been in the media world for years. He knew how to spin things, how to twist words to make himself look good. If I did this, I had to be ready. Before I could overthink it, I hit send. I watched the screen, my heart pounding. Maybe he wouldn't respond. Maybe he'd just ignore me. Or worse, maybe he'd post my message and turn it into another joke. I locked my phone and threw it onto my nightstand. I didn't want to stare at it all night, waiting for a reply that might never come. But even as I turned over and closed my eyes, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. I didn't expect him to respond. Not really. I thought maybe he'd ignore me, or worse, mock me again, turn it into another joke for his audience. But the next morning, when I woke up and checked my phone, there it was, a message from Mark Reynolds. Are you serious? I sat up, rubbing my eyes, making sure I wasn't imagining it. The message was real. And before I could overthink it, I typed back, yes, face to face. No scripts, just talk. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Three dots popped up, disappeared, then popped up again. I could almost see him thinking, trying to figure out if this was some kind of trap. "Fine," he finally wrote. "Come on my show. We'll talk." I exhaled slowly. This was happening. I didn't know if I was ready, but maybe that didn't matter anymore. The next day, I walked into the studio alone. No security, no one telling me what to say. I didn't want this to be another political game. I wanted it to be real. The moment I stepped inside, the cold air of the studio hit me, along with the sight of bright lights and cameras already in position. Mark Reynolds was sitting in the chair across from mine, dressed sharp, looking exactly the way he always did on TV. He glanced up as I walked in, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe? Like he didn't actually think I'd show up. He stood, extending a hand. "Barron," he said smoothly, like we were old friends. "Didn't think you'd actually come." I shook his hand, firm but quick. I said I would. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Then let's not waste time." I sat down, keeping my expression neutral, as the crew made last-minute adjustments. My heart was pounding, but I kept my breathing steady. This wasn't just some online comment section. This was real. I was about to talk to the man who had laughed at me like I was nothing. A voice from behind the camera counted down. 3, 2, 1, and we're live. Mark leaned forward slightly. The cameras locked onto him. "So, Barron Trump, the world has seen you grow up, but we haven't really heard from you. Why now?" I met his gaze. "Because you made it about me." That threw him off. Just a little. I saw in the way his eyebrows twitched, the way he hesitated for half a second before flashing that smooth, practiced smile. "Oh, come on. You're a Trump. You've been in the spotlight your whole life. But I didn't choose that." My voice was calm. "Even you did. When you mocked me on your show. When you made me the punchline." The smile on his face tightened. "It was a joke. At my expense." A pause. The room felt still, even with the cameras rolling, even with the crew watching. He had expected me to argue, to defend my dad, to fight, but I wasn't here to do that. He shifted in his chair. "Barron, your father is one of the most controversial figures in history. People are going to talk about him. And by extension, you." "I know," I said. "But do you ever stop and think about what that actually means for me? For my life?" He blinked. "Just once." "What do you mean?" I leaned forward slightly. "I was 15 when I saw people laughing at me on your show. Before I had ever said a word in public. Before I had done anything." The studio was silent. For the first time, he didn't have a quick answer. I could tell he was thinking, really thinking, and for the first time, I wondered if he actually felt. Mark adjusted his tie, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. He was thinking. That much was obvious. The confidence, the smoothness in his voice from before, it was still there, but something had changed. Maybe he hadn't expected me to push back. Maybe he thought I'd stumble, that I'd freeze up, that I'd give him an easy win. I didn't. He forced a chuckle, shaking his head. "Barron, listen, people make jokes. It comes with the territory. Your father." "I'm not my father." I interrupted. The words came out steady, clear. He blinked. For years, people had thrown my dad's name at me like it was my whole identity, like I wasn't allowed to be my own person. Mark had done the same thing just now, slipping into the habit so easily, as if that one sentence explained everything about me. His smile faltered for just a second. He knew what I meant. I kept going. "You talk about him. You criticize him. That's your job. Fine. But you weren't talking about him that night. You were talking about me. So let's stay on topic." Mark exhaled, leaning back slightly in his chair. "All right," he said. "Fair enough." For a moment, there was silence. Not the awkward kind, the heavy kind, the kind where two people are thinking a little harder than they expected to. He crossed his arms. "So, what do you want from this, Barron? An apology?" I shook my head. "No, I want to understand why." "Why what?" "Why you thought it was okay to mock a kid you didn't know. Why you thought it was funny." He blinked again. just like before. A little hesitation, like he wasn't sure where to go with this. "Come on," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "You really think you're the only one? Every president's kid goes through this. Sasha and Malia, Chelsea, the Bush twins. People talk." "Yeah," I said, but I wasn't even involved in anything. I never spoke publicly. I never gave speeches. I never tried to push my opinions on anyone. I was just existing. "And you decided that was enough to turn me into a joke." His jaw tightened. I could tell he didn't like where this was going. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said, and for the first time, it didn't sound like an excuse. It sounded like he was trying to convince himself. I nodded slowly. "But you did." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes flickered toward the camera, then back to me. I knew what he was thinking. He had built his career on moments like this, being in control, spinning the conversation the way he wanted. But right now, he wasn't in control, and he knew it. Mark shifted in his chair just slightly, but I noticed his confidence wasn't gone, but it was cracked, like he had walked into this interview expecting something completely different. Maybe he thought I would be defensive. Maybe he thought I'd stumble over my words, get frustrated, prove him right. But I wasn't here to play into his expectations. He sighed, tapping his fingers against the table again, a nervous habit I was starting to pick up on. "Barron, look, the media, this whole business, it's not personal. It's about the bigger picture. Your last name carries weight, whether you like it or not." "I know that," I said. "But does that mean I don't get to be a person?" Mark's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the cameras, probably aware that people were watching, that every word would be picked apart later. He was careful now, measuring his response. But I wasn't letting him slip away that easily. "You don't get it, do you?" I leaned forward slightly. "When you laughed at me, people followed your lead. You weren't just making a joke. You were giving permission. You were telling everyone else that it was okay to mock me too." He didn't say anything. I kept going. "Do you know what it's like to be 15 and see people twice your age tearing you apart online? To know that no matter what you say or do, people will already have their minds made up about you." A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe something else. "Barron, you get to go home after this," I said, cutting him off. "You get to move on." "But I don't. This is my life. Every time someone like you makes me a joke, it follows me. It's in the comments. It's in the headlines. It's everywhere I go." Mark exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't think about it that way. "That's the problem," I said. The room went silent again, but this time it was different. The air felt heavier, like we had finally reached a point neither of us could back away from. Mark looked down for a moment, then back up at me. His expression had changed. It wasn't the smooth, confident look he always had on TV. For the first time since this started, he actually looked unsure. And for the first time, I wondered if I had finally gotten through to him. Mark exhaled slowly, like he was choosing his next words carefully. His usual confidence was still there, but something had changed. The mask he wore on TV, the easy smirk, the quick comebacks, none of that was working anymore. He knew it. I knew it. And so did everyone watching. He leaned back slightly in his chair. "Barron, let me ask you something. If you weren't a Trump, do you think people would care this much?" I didn't even have to think about it. "No." He nodded, like that was the answer he expected. "So, you get why people talk. It's not about you personally. It's about what your name represents." I let that sit for a second. He thought he was making a point, but I wasn't going to let him spin it his way. "So that makes it okay?" "I didn't say that." "But you meant it." His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. "You act like I'm not a person, like I'm just a symbol for whatever people think about my dad. But I didn't choose my last name. I didn't choose to be in politics. I didn't choose any of this." Mark's fingers tapped against the table again. That nervous habit. "You're right," he admitted. "You didn't choose this life. But you have to admit, it comes with privileges too. Your family is one of the most powerful in the country." I felt my jaw tighten. "So that means I don't get to have feelings?" He sighed. rubbing the bridge of his nose. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? He hesitated. And that's when I realized the truth. He didn't know. For years, people like him had talked about me without ever thinking twice. I wasn't real to them. I was just a name, a headline, an easy joke. But now that I was sitting across from him, pushing back, forcing him to actually look at me as a person, he didn't have an answer. He looked down for a second, then back up. Barron, I've been in this business a long time. I've covered politicians, celebrities, scandals, you name it. And the truth is, the audience eats this stuff up. People want a story. They want something to talk about. I shook my head. Even if it hurts people? A beat of silence. Then, for the first time, Mark Reynolds looked like he actually understood. Maybe not fully, maybe not all the way, but something in him shifted. I never thought about it like that, he admitted quietly. I studied him, searching for any sign of an act, but I didn't see one. This wasn't the Mark Reynolds from TV. This was the real him. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, he actually felt sorry. For the first time since this interview started, Mark Reynolds had nothing to say. The man who made a career out of talking, out of controlling the narrative, out of turning real people into punchlines, was speechless. The silence stretched between us. I could hear the hum of the cameras, the quiet shuffling of the crew behind them. They were waiting, watching, probably wondering if he was going to find a way to spin this back in his favor. But he didn't. I held his gaze. I wasn't smug. I wasn't gloating. I was just waiting. Mark cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his chair. Look, Barron, He stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. I think maybe I misjudged the situation. I didn't say anything. He ran a hand through his hair. You're right, he admitted. I didn't think about what it was like for you. I didn't think about how it felt. I let the words settle. I could tell this wasn't easy for him. Maybe he had never been confronted like this before. Maybe he had never actually had to sit across from someone he had turned into a joke and see what it did to them. He sighed, glancing down at his hands, then back up at me. What do you want me to say? I tilted my head slightly. What do you think you should say? Another silence. This one was heavier than the last. Mark's fingers tapped against the table. I knew that nervous habit now. He was thinking, processing, struggling. Then, finally, he let out a breath and said something I never expected. I don't know. That was it. Just 3 words. But they meant more than any long-winded excuse or polished statement ever could. I nodded slowly. That's a start. He gave a small, almost defeated chuckle. Yeah, he muttered. I guess it is. Neither of us spoke after that. We just sat there, letting the silence speak for itself. The interview ended, but the weight of it didn't disappear. The moment the cameras shut off, Mark let out a breath, like he had been holding it in the entire time. He sat back, rubbing his temples, then looked at me, really looked at me. Not like a joke, not like a headline, but like a person. That was different, he finally said. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what to say. There was nothing left to argue about, nothing left to prove. I had said what I came to say. And for the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, he actually heard me. A producer stepped in, breaking the moment. That was intense, she muttered, glancing between us. Mark let out a dry laugh. Yeah, you could say that. The studio crew started moving again, wrapping up, unplugging wires, checking footage. The world outside was still waiting. I could already imagine the headlines, the reaction, the noise. People would pick apart every second of this interview. Some would say I won. Some would say I lost. Some would twist my words into something I never meant. But none of that mattered, because I hadn't done this for them. I stood up, adjusted my jacket. Mark watched me, like he was debating something. Then, finally, he spoke again. Listen, Barron. He hesitated, like he wasn't used to what he was about to say. I don't know if an apology is enough. I studied him, searching for any sign of an act, but there wasn't one. He actually meant it. I nodded. Maybe it's not, but it's a start. He nodded back, his expression unreadable. Maybe this would change him. Maybe it wouldn't. That wasn't up to me. I turned to leave, stepping out of the bright studio lights and into the cool hallway. The noise of the world was already waiting for me. But for the first time, I didn't feel like just a name in a headline. I felt like I had finally been heard. Thank you for listening to another exciting story from VIP Vault. If you have enjoyed listening to this story, check out our videos here.